guys! It is the end of June at Free Home Farm, and we have just finished up chicken season. I put the last 14 chickens in the freezer today. I spent the day cutting them up into parts, vacuum sealing them, labeling them, and putting them in the freezer. Over the month of June, we have put about we processed 130 chickens, give or take, but we sold some of those. So now we have about 100 chickens left, some whole and some in parts, and they are in between my house and the farm. We have 4 freezers, so we had to get creative and rearrange and find space within our 4 freezers to fit this chicken. This is going to be the chicken that we eat for the rest of the year. And then at some point in the fall, we'll butcher a pig too, so we'll have to make room in the fall. But anyway, in the process of rearranging the freezer, I found about 20 pounds of pork fat, which some of it is getting pretty old. I think 2015. Some of it people have given me over the years, like they're cleaning out their freezer or moving or something, so they offer me random parts, animal parts or fat or organs or whatever. So I have accumulated a bunch of fat. Now, I do use lard for cooking and I use tallow for cooking. Lard comes from pigs, tallow comes from cows. But in this case, I have been collecting this fat to make soap. And about once a year, I make a big batch of soap that is what we use in the bath, the shower, and in the bathrooms to wash our hands. And I make a big batch every year, and that's gotta last us all year. I still have some soap left over, but I do enjoy making soap. So I make it, and I like to try different recipes and different flavorings, scents. So I have a friend coming over on Thursday, and she wants to learn how to make soap. So I'm gonna show her how, and in the process, I'll make my soap for the year. So now is the time to render all of this pork fat down into lard so that in a couple days we can make soap. Here's the fat that I will be using to render, and this is all pork fat, and it all came from Mother Earth Meats out of Tennessee, I believe. And this is pasture-raised pork fat. Some of this, I think this says fat back. These are fat back. And that's fat back. This one is kidney fat. And that's from 2013. Oh. Well, back when it was fresh, this would have been used, if you render it down to make lard, it would be called leaf lard, which you use for like pastries and pie crust and that kind of stuff. In this case, it's kind of old and freezer burnt, so the flavor's probably not that great, but it'll be good for making soap. I noticed on this package over here, and this is a couple years old, it's got this green spot on it, and I've had people ask me before about that, if they notice some meat, or especially fat, it's more common with fat, to have green or blue on it. That's probably not mold. I won't really be able to tell till I get it out of the package. But in processing facilities where they cut up the animals and, well, will actually do the killing and then cut up the animals and do the butchering, the USDA inspector goes around with a stamp that has food grade ink. And when he inspects a whole carcass, a hanging carcass in the freezer, he will stamp the side of the animal with his seal of approval. So it's not uncommon to find little marks like that. The stamp is like a circle that's like 2 or 3 inches across. So if this came off of the outside of the animal, which this fat did, it might show up when you're opening the package and stuff. So it's not a big deal, especially not for making soap. So let me show you the tools that I'll be using tonight. First of all, I have a meat grinder. This is just a number 8 hand crank meat grinder, and I have found through my years of rendering lard and tallow that the smaller you can get the fat, the faster it will render. So these chunks of fat are like in strips or in like large pieces, so I wouldn't want to just take the whole thing and put it in the crock pot. I'm going to get it down into smaller. The smaller the better. You could, if you don't have a meat grinder, you could just cut it up with a knife into chunks, like dice it into like 1/2-inch pieces, but it really is faster if you use a meat grinder. And then, like I said, it's going into the crock pot. So here's my crock pot. It's set up, ready to go. You could do this on the stove or in the oven. I've done all three. They're all fine. I just happen to like the fact that the crock pot is nice and big. I have an 8-quart, 7 or 8, I think it's 8-quart crock pot, and I can set it and walk away, and I don't have to worry about it. So this whole process will take a few hours to get all of the fat out of, all of the fat rendered out of the solid pieces. So that's it. The crock pot and the meat grinder and the fat. That's about it. Oh, and here on the stove, I just have a tiny pot of stock going. I'll show you that. When I was packing up the chickens, I had just a few pieces left over that didn't fit in my packages, or just like the ends of it. So I've just made a little pot of stock. We'll probably have this for breakfast in the morning. This has a couple necks, a couple legs, and a couple feet. Some random parts. But anyway, let me get started with the rendering of the lard. Well, that was a workout. I'm definitely going to need to get an electric meat grinder before we make sausage in the fall. But that was about, so far I've done about 5 pounds of pork fat ground up. And if you'll notice, it is 11:38 at night. So yeah, I'm kind of a night owl. I do this kind of stuff at night after everyone's in bed. I think I will go ahead and stop here for now and get these 2 plates of fat into the crock pot. And it is getting late, so I may or may not do the rest of it tonight. I might save this for tomorrow. But I will go ahead and put this in the crock pot and get this part started. I went ahead and turned the crock pot on high to get it warmed up while I was grinding. So I will put this in and then keep an eye on it for a few minutes to make sure it doesn't burn starting out. This is going to cook way down once it starts to melt. started to melt and I can actually see some liquid fat on top, I will start straining this into a jar. I have a quart-sized mason jar here with a jar funnel and a mesh strainer. Any of the undissolved pieces in the strainer, I'll just go ahead and dump back into the crock pot and let it continue breaking down. Good morning! Last night I was able to get 2 full quart jars of lard, and it has cooled overnight, so it's turned solid white. And it's actually solid, it won't spill out. I could scoop it out with a spoon. And that was in about 3 hours from the time that I put it in the crock pot, and I was straining off every 20 minutes or so, and I did that for about 3 hours. And then when I went to bed, I turned the crock pot down to low and just let it simmer on low overnight. So this is how it looks now. This dark stuff in the pot now is called cracklins, and it's turned like a dark brown color, and that is anything that wasn't fat, or it was like a different type of fat that didn't turn to liquid, and now it's like these crunchy bits, almost like pork rinds is what it tastes like, but there's just a little bit of liquid left. And I have been straining out a little bit this morning. So this morning I've just gotten a cup or 2 of the liquid that was rendered overnight. So from here, if this was really good quality fat that wasn't a couple years old, I might eat the cracklins. They're pretty tasty. But since this is kind of older and the flavor is probably not so great, I'm not going to eat it this time. And you'll notice that the fat that comes off of this would be like the first rendering, the first clean white lard that we've pulled off. This is the second rendering, and it's a bit darker, and it's got a much stronger pork flavor. So I would use, if I was cooking with this, I would use the first rendering for anything that I didn't really want a strong pork flavor, and then the second rendering can be used for other stuff. For the purposes of soap, I don't think that it matters, because once it goes through the soap process, it loses the flavor altogether. Or I'll add some essential oils and some other stuff, so it'll take on the scent of the essential oils more so than the pork. I've never noticed a real porky smell in our essential oil soap. Alright, so I'll just let that finish straining off there, and when that's done, I'll close these up, and I'll go ahead and put them in the refrigerator for now to help them keep longer, but in a couple days we'll be using them to make soap. I guess that's all for now. To recap, I took 5 pounds of fat back and rendered it into 2.5 quarts of lard, which we'll use to make soap. So make sure you check out our next video when we use this lard, plus coconut oil, olive oil, and a few other ingredients to make soap. See you next time!